Appreciate it.
All right.
Hello and welcome into the first episode of Preps to Pros. I'm National Recruiting Analyst Cooper Petagna alongside my co-host Andrew Ivins. And if you don't know how we got here, a little bit about us. I started in the personnel world, have jumped all over the place, Michigan, Washington, Oregon. Joined the media forces about a year ago. Andrew Ivins has been covering the states of Florida and Georgia for as long as I've known him, and one of the best in the industry. So a lot going on. But basically, we want this show to be a little bit of everything. We want the scouting side, also with the insider side, and I think Andrew and I will complement each other well. We also want this to be your show now that we're on the YouTube platform. So any suggestions, comments, questions that you might have, please send our way. But we are super excited to get our start here at Preps to Pros. And Drew, we got a lot to talk about, my friend, starting with the conversation for number one, Arch Manning. And what is a Preps to Pros show without a little Arch Manning talk? But Arch Manning, in the top 247 rankings today, holds his number one spot. You see there, Dante Moore, the challenger, moves up all the way from number 8 to number 2. We've talked about him all day today and how this discussion and how this might play out over the next 5 months as we inch forward to December. But Drew, you kind of been a fly on the wall during these recruiting council meetings. I'm interested to kind of get your opinion, and which guy do you lean to when it comes to Arch Manning and Dante Moore?
Well, I mean, I was going to ask you this, Cooper. Are you tired of talking about Arch Manning? You know, that's all you have to discuss, Arch Manning versus Dante Moore. Look, to me, I don't have an opinion yet, right? I think it's got to be a quarterback at the top of the list right now based upon what we know, what we have seen this summer, what we saw as a junior and all that stuff. And, I think Dante, when you think body of work, how can you argue against him? I mean, this is a guy that's 38-6 as a starting quarterback on Friday nights. He won a state title as a junior. Every setting we have seen him in over the years, he's been awesome. And I say setting because I've seen this kid probably play 7-on-7, 5, 6, 7 times. We saw him at the Elite 11 finals, and he's just always competing. He's one of those guys that doesn't take a weekend off. So I love the fact that he's 38-6 as a starter. The other thing I like is he's only 17 years old. Most of these quarterbacks out here, their parents are holding them back a year or two to kind of get a developmental boost, we should say. And I think for Dante Moore, when I look at his body, I don't love the lower half or I think it's got a ways to go. And then when you start realizing he's only 17, once he starts to mature a little bit more, I think he's going to be a different animal. So, I like Dante Moore a lot. Blair Angulo, our colleague, I think it was in a text thread a few weeks ago, he tossed out Donovan McNabb as a player comp for Dante Moore. And I kind of love that. I said like peak Andy Dalton, but he's a guy with an NFL arm that can layer the football to all the different levels. He's super efficient, doesn't throw a lot of picks, only 6 picks over his past 2 seasons after throwing 11 as a freshman. So he's gotten more and more protective of the football. And, I'm not saying he's the guy, but I think Dante Moore, if we're talking body of work, he certainly makes a case for that number 1 spot.
Well, it's been an interesting conversation. We've gone back and forth on it, and I don't know if there's a clear answer. I think part of our show and what we want to do is kind of pull the curtain back a little bit and kind of educate you, the audience, on kind of what goes into this. And I think the Dante Moore conversation along with Arch Manning was one of the more interesting dialogues that we've had and that we will continue to have. And listen, with Arch Manning, you talk about a guy who I think is a winner, right? And I can go to the statistics, 25-6 and 65% completion rate and all this type of stuff. But for us and for me individually, I think what it comes down to is 4 to 5 years from now, I think NFL front offices are going to be having a very similar type of conversation. And I think the long-term potential with Arch Manning versus Dante Moore is one of the main reasons why that we decided to go with Arch Manning here at the number 1 spot. But we got to remember, there's 5 months of context left in this season. If Dante Moore continues to do what he has done throughout his high school career, he's going to be in that number 1 spot. So Arch Manning is going to have to elevate his game. He's going to have to remind everybody why he's the number 1 quarterback in the country. So that's definitely going to be an interesting one to watch. But Drew, let's talk about a couple other guys that are going to be outside contenders here for the number 1 spot for the top 247. Starting at the top with Cormani McLean, the number 4 player in the top 247, the top defensive back prospect in the class of 2023, the top defensive prospect overall. I was talking about earlier, there's only been 3 guys in the last 5 years that we've had ranked within the top 5. Those guys were at the defensive back position. That was Derek Stingley, and the other guy was Travis Hunter, which you know a thing or two about. Drew, tell me what you like so much about Cormani McLean, and does he have a legitimate shot in your mind to contend for the number 1 spot?
Well, I think it's going to be difficult for Cormani. I mean, we try to mirror our rankings after the NFL draft, and there's never been a corner that's gone number 1 overall. So I think he's got that working against him. The other thing I think he's got working against him, is the fact that he's had some so-so performances here on the offseason camp circuit. And, a lot of people are bringing that up. A lot of analysts are bringing up, hey, man, he got beat at Future 50 out in Las Vegas at overtime 7. He gave up a few passes. And, I don't know if I'm the president of the club here or I don't know, but I'm planting my flag. I'm not concerned about Cormani McLean struggling here and there in a passing-only setting because on Friday nights, this guy's one of the best in the country. I mean, he's all of 6'1.5". He's got a 4.5 laser timed 40-yard dash, 4.4 shuttle, 120-inch broad jump. Actually, I think it's 128 inches, and he's got 19 interceptions. This is a guy who's only played quarter for 2 years. So it's the length, it's the physical profile. That's what makes Cormani McLean really special. And I was texting a college coach this morning. Some guy just randomly reached out. I don't think he's ever watched Cormani McLean or scouted Cormani McLean. And I kind of gave him everything I just gave you, the numbers, what he's done on varsity games in pads. And he said, well, yeah, you're absolutely right. That guy's kind of a stud. So I like Cormani. Can he get to number 1? I mean, he's going to be kind of bucking the trend of what we've seen in terms of the NFL draft in recent years. But, man, if I need a shutdown corner, a guy to play on the outside, a guy that can take away one side of the field, Cormani McLean is that cornerback. And he's still got a ways to go. When you kind of look at him, he's still kind of a baby, got some baby deer in him. But he has all the tools to be a special one.
I think sometimes we get a little bit fatigued with these top players. We've talked a lot about Arch Manning, Dante Moore, now new to the conversation as well. But Cormani McLean is a guy that we've been high on. Drew, you've been high on for quite some time. And seeing him this weekend, we talked about it after the Future 50. It was a quiet performance for him. But if you're a defensive back, that's what you want. And then you look at the athletic makeup. Everything you just mentioned, that is what those guys look like, cornerback ones in the NFL. So I'm right there with you. I have no doubts, little reservation on Cormani McLean. But Drew, I want to get to the scoop side of it. I think we're going to call this the juice going forward. So what is Andrew Ivins' juice on Cormani McLean on the recruiting trail?
Yeah, this is really a 3-team battle for Cormani McLean. And, my crystal ball has been on Florida for a few months now. I think if it was up to Cormani and the Gators were Florida of 2006 when they were winning national titles, it'd be a slam dunk. He's going to go to Gainesville. That's where he's going to go. I think he's got a lot of ties to some people there. That's where he grew up liking. But at the same time, Florida's still trying to figure things out under Billy Napier. And he likes Billy Napier and Corey Raymond, who's known as an ace recruiter. But I think he's kind of in wait and see mode. And the other part of this is Alabama's in there. Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide. Cormani spent a few days in Tuscaloosa last month on an unofficial visit, and he really, really liked it. He's going to return to Alabama for that Texas A&M game in October. I think everyone in the nation is going to be watching that game. Cormani's going to use his official visit then. So I'm sticking with Florida on the crystal ball now, but man, there's some serious talk about Alabama. I've gotten close to maybe flipping it, but in the back of my head, I think Cormani really likes Florida. I think he likes Gainesville. I think he's comfortable in Gainesville, only 2 hours from Polk County, which is where he's from. So that's why I'm waiting. I want to see what Billy Napier and the Gators do early on in the season. And then the third team in here is the Miami Hurricanes. They're recruiting as good as anyone right now. Cormani just went there to Coral Gables for an official visit. He's really close with DeMarcus Van Dyke, who's a defensive analyst for the Hurricanes. He's been recruiting Cormani as long as anyone else. And then Mario Cristobal, Cooper, you work for him. He's a dog of a recruiter. I think, Mario's probably the first guy that texts Cormani every morning. So still some ways to go in this recruitment. Cormani told me he doesn't have a decision date. He doesn't know when it's going to come. If I had to handicap it right now, maybe Alabama's the Vegas favorite, but I wouldn't rule out Florida, and then I wouldn't rule out the Miami Hurricanes either.
Why would you need an alarm clock when you got Mario Cristobal to wake you up at 4:30 in the morning every morning? Cormani McLean, I'm sure he loves that. But Drew, let's go on to another guy who kind of slid back just a little bit in our rankings. Malachi Nelson. He goes from the number 2 player in the top 247 to the number 5 player in the top 247, and still ranked one of the top 3 arms in the country. But you've gotten to see quite a bit of him this offseason. You got to see him in Las Vegas at the OT 7-on-7 event. We also got to see him this weekend at the Future 50. What are your thoughts on Malachi Nelson?
He's a pure distributor of the football. You know, when I saw him out in Las Vegas at the OT7, I thought he struggled. Talking with Greg Biggins, who's one of our guys out on the West Coast, it sounds like Malachi was maybe dealing with some shoulder issues. And, I'm a guy that is into the rehab and workout world, and you could tell that he had gotten some cupping done on the shoulder. So I kind of buy into that. And I'm not saying that's an excuse, but, this past weekend down in rainy Florida, I thought Malachi was awesome. He was throwing alongside Jackson Arnold, J.J. Cole, the Iowa State quarterback commit, and he was by far the best arm in that 7-on-7 setting. I'm excited, to see what he does in pads this season. He plays a big early season game against American Heritage right down the road for me, which is obviously home to Brandon Ennis, and it has put a ton of guys in the NFL. So he's got a showcase game that's going to be on ESPN. But no one is probably as good as just distributing the football so quickly, throwing a tight spiral that you can catch it. What I liked in Bradenton is he wasn't afraid to take some deep vertical shots. And I think out in Las Vegas, he got, a little timid at times. So that's what I like about him, just how he gets rid of that football.
Love his fit in Lincoln Riley's offense. Out now going to be a Big Ten West team, if you can believe that. But he is certainly surrounded by a lot of talent at Los Alamitos. Louisville commit Dante Moore and also Makai Lemon as well within the top 32 in the top 247. But Drew, let's move on to the next guy, and a guy that you love and you spent a lot of time around, Keon Keely from Berkeley Prep in Tampa. This is one of our favorite guys. We've been talking about him for a long time. I think even when we got on this show, he was outside the top 247. Now he's all the way up into the top 10, number 7 player in the country. You think, I know you do, that he's got a legitimate shot to make some noise for the number 1 spot?
I do. I think if I look at the top 10, aside from Dante Moore and Arch Manning, and I had to choose a guy that could finish number 1, it's Keon Keely. He's a guy that hasn't been to a ton of camps. We haven't really seen much. I mean, we actually don't even have verified data on him from some type of, third-party service or anything like that. Sure, we got the numbers from the schools. So I drove out to Tampa back in the spring to go to his spring game because we needed to size him up. And he looks like a Greek god. He looks like a first-round draft pick. I mean, I was hanging out with Greg Russo and Jalen Phillips at Miami's Legend Camp a few weeks ago, and those guys are the same size as Keon Keely. Keon Keely is a real dude. As a junior, what do you have? 16 and a half sacks for Tampa Berkeley Prep. I mean, he comes off the edge. He's got big, long arms. He can bat the ball down. So I think if we're talking body type, and what we've seen recently in the NFL, front offices are valuing pass rushers, guys that can slow down high up-tempo offenses. I think Keon Keely's it. So I really want to see what he does as a senior here over the next few months. But if there's a guy to keep an eye on as someone that could rise, I don't know all the way to number 1, but maybe number 2, number 3, number 4, I think it is Keon Keely, who is committed to Notre Dame and first-year head coach Marcus Freeman.
Wrote a little bit about him this morning in terms of the outside contenders. He's certainly a name to watch, but you talked about it. The sack production is there also with the length, the combination to go speed to power. He can beat you so many different ways, and he's such a sudden athlete. I love Keon Keely. I love that fit, and guess what? He's going to go up against another top 32 guy at Notre Dame in South Bend, and Charles Jagasada. We'll talk a little bit more about him a little bit later, but Nicholas Harper, Andrew, we talk about this guy and how he escaped Area 51 all the time. People really just don't move as fast as Nicholas Harper does. 6'5", 225 pounds. This guy, it is yet to be seen or determined whether he's going to play offense or defense. But in terms of the athletic makeup, you talked about it with Keon Keely, but positional value-wise, this is why this guy's in the top 10. And I know for us, this was one of those things we kind of wanted to protect ourselves when you look at the athlete like Nicholas Harper. What do you think about him and his potential chances to enter the conversation for number 1?
Well, so last night I got home from the Future 50, turned on the TV, was watching the World Track Meet, 200-meter dash, 400-meter dash. I thought Nicholas Harper would be out there because he's that fast. Like he one day should be running in the Olympics or some type of national competition or international competition, I should say. I mean, this is a guy that went 27.9 in the 200-meter dash without starting blocks, and I don't think the average fan knows how insane that is. I mean, he can just move. To me, I would love to see Nicholas Harper on the defensive side of the ball. I'm a little hesitant about seeing him on offense. I think his MO, what his highest ceiling is going to be, is a guy that's just crashing downhill on third down in certain situations. So I'm a big fan of Nicholas Harper. I know you always say he came from Area 51, but man, athletic profile, this guy is a true freak. And you know, a lot of schools want him. I know one Power 5 staffer told me a few months ago when I was talking with him, hey, who's your favorite recruit in the class? They asked me, and I said, I don't know. I can't even remember who I tossed out. He said, mine's without a doubt Nicholas Harper. So the guys that manage personnel really, really, really like Mr. Harper.
I mean, what's there not to like with him? Nick, if you're listening, please listen to us. Play defense. Go get that money. Young man, you are the man. We love watching you play. I want to see you play defense, Nick, at the next level. So the next guy, Jackson Arnold, the Elite 11 MVP out in Los Angeles, turned a lot of heads, got a lot of fans at the 247 Sports Network. We saw him this weekend. I think it's safe to say it was a little bit of a up and down performance from him. I think coming off that high in LA at the Elite 11 finals. But Drew, do you think he can make a real run at number one? He is the lowest ranked guy, but he is a 5-star that we have in this conversation. 14-2 as a starter against elite level competition at Denton Guyer next year. To me, the schedule says, okay, if this guy continues to do what he did last year, maybe he can enter the mix, but he's kind of a guy that's a little bit more of a dark horse.
Well, this is why we do multiple evaluations, right? This is why it's an ongoing process. I think a lot of people see something in a vacuum, and that's their final call on a kid. And, you know, Jackson obviously was out in Los Angeles, won the Elite 11 MVP. This past weekend at the Future 50 in the 7-on-7 game, I was doing the stats for us, unofficial stats. I think he was, 3 of 11, bad interception. I mean, he just didn't seem to be processing that day. And I'm not going to sit here and knock him for that, but you know, it raised an eyebrow for me. You mentioned it though, 14-2 on Friday nights in a very, very talented classification right there in the Lone Star State. So I think the stage is set. If he has an exceptional year with his high school team, maybe something like Cade Klubnik did last year, the Clemson signee, then absolutely, yeah, he can shoot up right there. But for me, I got to see a little bit more after that performance in Bradenton.
He's one of the most well-rounded quarterbacks in the class. I think that's safe to say. 3,900 passing yards last season with another 600 on the ground. I know he's one of probably the more equipped dual threat quarterbacks that we have in the class. But we'll keep an eye on Jackson Arnold. But Drew, I want to turn to a different topic, some of the top risers in the top 247, as we'll get to Charles Jagasaw, Notre Dame commit. How about Notre Dame and the Fighting Irish, man? They just keep coming. Marcus Freeman, a heck of a year on the recruiting trail. Charles Jagasaw, a big mover for us. He gets into the top 32 now, but a young offensive lineman, 6'6", 308 pounds, 41-0. On the wrestling mat last year, Drew, but he is a guy that I think we mentioned, iron sharpens iron, a lot of matchups to look forward to with Keon Keely there. But what do you think about Jagasaw and just overall maybe the job that Marcus Freeman has been doing for Notre Dame so far?
This reminds me of, Ronnie Stanley, Quentin Nelson. I mean, good offensive linemen come out of Notre Dame, and if this is a sign of what's to come for the Irish, then look out for wherever Notre Dame ends up in a conference or whoever's on the schedule. And Charles Jagasada, he reminds me of kind of these throwback linemen. I love the wrestling profile, and we always talk about it multi-sport here. And with the big offensive lineman, I think multi-sport's super important. Jagasaw, I love the profile. Interested to see what he's able to do in South Bend. He's going to be, like you said, against Keon Keely. So you would think he is going to be your prototypical left tackle, and he's a guy that just engulfs pass rushers and kind of pushes them aside.
Freeman and the Irish putting together one of the best offensive line classes in the 2023 cycle. So Charles Jagasaw, a favorite of ours, and he dominates on both sides of the line of scrimmage. You supplement that with what he's done on the wrestling mat. You love kind of the athletic and mental makeup of this young man. So a lot to be excited about if you're a Notre Dame fan, especially in the trenches. But Drew, let's go on to another guy in your neck of the woods. Aiden Williams keeps moving up the board, and the more we talk about this guy, the more we get excited. The more we see this guy, the more we love him. Tell me about Aiden Williams and how he found himself in 5-star territory.
I don't want to say wanted to not like Hakeem Williams when I was first introduced to him, but he was a guy, he wasn't playing 7-on-7. He was at Stranahan, a school that really hasn't had much college football talent come out of it in recent years. It turns out he wasn't playing 7-on-7 because he was doing basketball and swimming. He actually swam varsity as a freshman at Stranahan. Don't hear that a lot when it comes to big time Power Five football prospects. But the more we learn about him, the more we like. Has the highest max speed out there for the UC report right now. He's a big physical receiver. He plays a little defensive end here and there, and you just love the body. I mean, when you stand next to him, he's not 6'5", but he feels 6'5". He just has such a presence to him. He can go up and win a football. He's excellent after the catch for a guy, someone his size. I think that's what we like about him. Had a double-double in the state Final Four for his basketball team, but the stock's rising. One player comparison I have on his profile is N'Keal Henry, the former Arizona State wide receiver that went to the New England Patriots. Didn't really pan out for him, but I think he can have that type of impact on Saturdays in a Power 5 conference. And I think he also reminds me a little bit of Ja'Cory Brooks, who's now at Alabama, but a big fan of Mr. Hakeem Williams.
Kind of reminds me more of a recent comp, but I would say Chris Marshall ended up signing with Texas A&M last year, and a guy that came on really strong, had the basketball background as well. But Drew, I'm kind of looking at the script here, and Hakeem Williams, guess where he's from? He's from the Sunshine State, which means Drew's got some juice. Give it to me, Drew.
Yeah, so I was with Hakeem on Sunday. My crystal ball is on Texas A&M right now, just kind of talking off the record with him. I think Georgia has tightened this race. I think that it might be 1A, 1B for him right now. And then I think there's some other schools involved in that recruitment. The University of Pittsburgh. Hakeem has visited there multiple times, was in the Steel City for an official visit. He really, really liked it. Taekwon Underwood, the receivers coach, Charlie Partridge, who's an ace recruiter in South Florida. They have those guys heavily, heavily involved. And yes, Pittsburgh just lost Jordan Addison to USC, but I think, the decision makers at Pittsburgh could potentially kind of figure out some type of NIL package or set up some deals where, hey, Pittsburgh's a lot more attractive. Let's also not forget Pittsburgh won an ACC title. So they're the dark horse for me in the recruitment. And then one other team I want to toss out there, Florida State and Mike Norvell. Hakeem Williams told me he's going to visit Tallahassee on July 30th, which is that last week. There's a temporary break in the dead period where kids can take visits, not official visits. You can take unofficial visits. So Hakeem's going to go up to Tallahassee. He says he wants to hang out with Ron Dugans. And I think, Hakeem has realized the Seminoles have a little juice on the recruiting trail right now. They just got two big offensive linemen, Lucas Simmons, Roderick Kearney. He mentioned to me that Brock Glenn might be, headed to FSU. So I think Florida State's involved there. Like I say, with all these FSU targets, Florida State's obviously going to have to win here in year 3 for Mike Norvell, but that's a big name where I think FSU has found some footing as of late with where maybe a few months ago that wasn't the case.
That is some news, and that's why you watch Preps to Pros. We got Pittsburgh in it for a top 32 guy. We got Florida State in there as well. But you mentioned Brock Glenn, and it wasn't too long ago, Drew, that when we were a Twitter show, we were on here talking about Florida State and what was the direction of the program in terms of recruiting. Give a lot of credit to Mike Norvell and his staff. Alex Atkins, the offensive line coach, also doing a great job there as well. But Drew, let's turn our attention to another Florida prospect and a guy that has really turned some heads. We went back, we looked at the junior season. We kind of studied the tape a little bit more throughout the offseason. The more and more we started to get feedback on this player, we liked him. But Damon Wilson is certainly one of your favorites and a top riser for us.
Oh, man, Damon Wilson. I can't get enough of him. I think Thursday morning when I was driving over to the Future 50, stopped at Venice High School, which is actually where my fiance went to high school, to see Mr. Wilson go through workouts. I think I texted you guys right away, hey, this guy's probably a 5-star. Mr. Wilson, 15 sacks last season in Florida's highest classification. He was a man-child out on the edge. On top of that, he's a beast in the weight room, 420-pound bench press, 570-pound back squat, right? And he's a freak. I asked him, hey, how come you even visited a ton of schools this summer? He's like, to be honest, I'm doing construction with my father after school. He does demolition work. So after he moves all that iron in the weight room, he goes out to the job site with a sledgehammer and he's taking down walls, throwing them into dumpsters. So he's just a blue collar pass rusher. And I think he's really, really skilled. I mean, he's got some heavy hands and he's got twitch and burst. And, he's one of the best and the college football's best. This is going to be one of the biggest battles to track over the next few months, especially if he holds out. Because I think Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Miami, all those schools have a chance, and they're going to want this guy because he has a chance to make an impact very early in his college career.
He screams SEC type of defender when you think about Will Anderson and some of those guys that Alabama has had. Dallas Turner, certainly a guy that you're high on in Tuscaloosa, but you look at this Damon Wilson, there's so much to like there, and you talked about it. Such a explosive lower body and his ability to go speed to power. He is one of the toughest assignments for any offensive lineman in the country to take. So certainly a lot to like about Damon Wilson. Drew, what's the latest with Damon Wilson on the recruiting trail?
Just put out his top 5, right? So Georgia's in there. He took an unofficial visit to UGA back during the season. I think he really liked that. Was also at Alabama for an official visit. Alabama's telling him, hey, you're the next Will Anderson. I think if I'm a kid and Nick Saban and Pete Golding are telling me hey, I'm one of the college football's best pass rushers, I'm certainly going to like that. Few other schools in there. Texas, he's never been to Austin before, but because of Arch Manning and how Steve Sarkisian's recruiting, he's interested in them, wants to learn a little bit more of them. And I think you've got to watch out for Miami here. I was asking him, where are you going to visit that last week of July? He said it's most likely going to be UM. He's going to go down to Coral Gables for, I think they're having some type of cookout. And the coach that's recruiting him is Jason Taylor, who's a defensive analyst, one of the best pass rushers ever. So I think Miami's a team to sneakily watch there. And then the last one, Ohio State, they're telling Damon Wilson that you could be the next Chase Young for us or one of the Bosa brothers. So he's got a full slate of options. If I had to guess, gun to my head, I think Georgia's one to watch. But again, this recruitment's got a ways to go. He's in no rush. He's too busy wearing the hard hat, sweating in the summer instead of posting, top 12s, top 10s, top 8s, and then getting down to that top 5.
If he continues to do what he's been doing throughout his high school career, I think this is going to be a really tough guy to keep out of the top 32. So we'll keep our eye on Damon Wilson. But Drew, another guy that we got to see this weekend, the freak of all freaks, and a guy that you love to talk nutrition with. That is PJ Adibaware, the Oklahoma commit. And this guy, let me tell you something, is a physical specimen. He gets into the top 50 for us in the top 247. Talk to us a little bit about what you saw this weekend and just where he goes from here in terms of his projection and his upside.
Well, he's big and long. I mean, I really want to hear your take. I know you watch a little bit more of the defensive line, but this is one of the top testers in the class of 2023 as a whole. I was talking to PJ a little bit. I said, what's the freakiest thing you can do? And he started rattling off his numbers. And 4.8 in the 40-yard dash, 34-inch vert, 4.3 shuttle. On top of that, he told me he used to eat 6 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches a day just to kind of put on some weight. So he's a freak. I think a lot of people in America would love to have that diet. I personally would, 6 PB&Js. But Cooper, I mean, you saw the one-on-ones more than me in Bradenton. What did you think of PJ?
I liked him. It was kind of the setting. We saw Lucas Simmons, who was another riser for us. So you got to see two guys who I think are more clay than a finished product. But looking at PJ Adibaware, it's one of these guys. I think for him, once he gets to Norman, Oklahoma, and he gets to be under Brent Venables, this is going to be a guy that I think the sky is the limit for him. The physical tools are certainly there. We've talked a lot about the wingspan and the length, but I think for him, he's just got to develop more technically and continue to develop. But I love his clay. I think he's got top 32 skill set really at the end of the day. So once he gets in the right structure, the right weight strength conditioning program and nutrition program in Oklahoma, I think he's certainly going to benefit. And I don't think there's a better place for him to go than OU. And talking to him, he is well-rounded. I like him a lot. I think he's going to figure it out at the next level. Just needs a little bit more access to better coaching in the collegiate ranks. So I'm certainly excited to see what he does at the next level. But Drew, let's turn our attention now to the Future 50. Both of us were down there this weekend along with Brandon Huffman and Alan True covering the event in Bradenton, Florida. A lot of firepower there. Francis Malago, the Miami commit, he moves up from number 13 to number 11 in the top 247. And I think me and you have been having this kind of dialogue. You sent me a text late last night that you think Francis Malago might be the best offensive lineman that you've ever seen.
Yeah, that was after, I'm gonna admit, that was after a glass of wine. I was recovering, but I was going through my notes, kind of recapping the weekend. I think he's one of the safest prospects in the class of 2023. I mean, we keep mentioning freak athlete. I think you're gonna see that's a theme on Preps to Pros. We love the word freak. We like these multi-sport bodies, and Malagoa, he was awesome. He's just gotten so good. It's amazing that a few years ago he was in American Samoa, and then he was like playing defensive line. He's really embraced the idea of being an offensive tackle. And I just love how he has such a wide base and he just makes things look easy. And he can take guys to the ground. He's going to play left tackle this fall at IMG Academy. I know, Cooper, you've brought that up in a bunch. You're ready to see him on that blind side. But to me, he's a safe pick. And if he isn't a tackle, I think he's an all-pro guard. I mean, he's going to be something. And I think it's an excellent pickup for the University of Miami. And I think he's someone that should be able to play relatively early. And we've seen this in the past from Mario Cristobal from his days dating back to Alabama. When he was at Oregon, he is not afraid to play true freshman. So I really like Francis Malago. I think he's very, very safe as a prospect.
Well, you got Francis Malago, the number 2 offensive tackle in the top 247, and so much to like about him. But you talked about it, Drew. I think this is a guy that will play early at Miami. I think there were some questions. If there was, IMG is a very run-heavy program. So for him, I think it was more, hey, can this guy hold up in terms at the left tackle position at the next level? He had no issues at all, was the offensive lineman MVP and one of the best big men there at the Future 50 event. But let's go to the skill position now. Drew, Zion Branch, listen, for me, if you're small, you got to be special. I've had some questions. A lot of the comparisons being thrown around on this guy have been Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, and I'm like, hey, let's slow down a little bit. Now, after seeing him this weekend, I get it and I understand. I think you look at his physical background, the traits that he has, a 10-3 100 meter. Everywhere he's gone, he's kind of lit up these camps and combines. What were your general impressions of what USC's getting in Zion Branch?
Well, you got to get the right branch. It's Zechariah Branch.
Zechariah.
Zion Branch is
First episode,
Zion
Kinks.
Branch
Go.
is his brother last year who signed with USC. No, I check in Zechariah. I said, why didn't you run track this spring? And he said, hey, my dad wasn't coaching. I wasn't going to do it, but I think I could go 10-1. And I kind of laughed. And you're like, well, I think he could probably do that. And then we go out to the one-on-ones, and he caught like 4 straight touchdowns. Took over the 7-on-7 game out there. He's just explosive. I mean, the lightning in a bottle phrase gets tossed around so much, but it's true with him. His ability and the power he is able to generate with his legs is very unique and dynamic. You mentioned what it's going to be like to see Jackson Arnold in Lincoln Riley's offense out at USC. I can't wait to see Zechariah Branch in there. That's going to be a reason for me to watch, well, what I used to call Pac-12 after dark. I guess it's going to be Big Ten after dark. But he's going to be a weapon in the slot. I think you can get creative with how you get him the ball. And I personally think he can get a little bit done in between the tackles. So he is a weapon. I love the Jalen Waddle comp. And we're seeing more of these guys get selected earlier, chunk play guys in the NFL draft, guys that can take a 5-yard gain and turn it into a 25-yard gain. And Branch is probably one of the best in the class of 2023 when it comes to doing just that.
My apologies to Zechariah Branch. That's a rookie move. And guess what? It's the first episode. We're still working through it on my end. But, Drew, let's go to another guy, DeSean Womack, top 247 defender from St. Francis High School in Baltimore. And this is a guy that we expected to come in and have a very good weekend at the Future 50 down in Florida. And he did. He really only struggled when he got to Francis Malagoa. But tell me what you thought. I know you spent a lot of time in the skill position, but the little glimpses that you got of DeSean Womack, the LSU commit down in Florida.
I just love his body type, frame build. I think we list him at 245 pounds. To me, this is a guy that's going to get up to 275 pounds after he lifts in that Tiger strength program, and he's going to be a monster. He's scheme versatile. I think he can move him up and down. I actually did see him. We're seeing this clip right now last year against St. Thomas Aquinas, and I remember him running around, and his game has progressed immensely since then. And Cooper, you're in LSU country. I mean, I'm going to ask you, what did you think of him? Because I think he's kind of the gem of Brian Kelly's class, who was just speaking at SEC Media Days. I mean, you pair him potentially with Quincy Wiggins, who was LSU's, top signee last year on the defensive side of the ball. That front seven is going to be scary at some point down the line in Baton Rouge, which it should be. That's always been the case at LSU.
Yeah, LSU's been hot, and you got to give a lot of credit to defensive line coach Jamar Cain, who really got all their momentum started in the month of July. They had one of the best weeks of any team in the country in early July, and DeSean Womack was a really big part of that. But you talk about other guys that they have in this class, top 24/7 defender Joshua Mickens out of the state of Indiana, who we've covered a lot. He moved up the board for us. Jackson Howard as well from the state of Minnesota. So there's a lot to like. But I love DeSean Womack. Really the biggest thing with him is the amount of force and the amount of urgency that he plays with. And then kind of seeing him this week down in Florida, this was a guy that kind of lined up all over the place. You saw him at 5 technique, you saw him at 3 technique, and was really comfortable in those spots. But I think a guy, because of his pure athleticism in his motor, we don't say this a lot, but he's going to be the type of guy that's going to be able to make an instant impact in Baton Rouge. And listen, give credit to Brian Kelly and his staff and Jamar Cain and what they've been able to do, especially in the trenches on the defensive line. I like where LSU is sitting right now. DeSean Womack certainly going to be a big part of that class. But Drew, our last guy from Florida, one of the standouts, Aiden Williams. I got to see him earlier in the spring in New Orleans at a 7-on-7 event. He was a guy that continued to impress. I think there were some speed concerns, but the more we see this guy, he's one of the biggest alphas at every event. Just knows how to get open, very sudden at the top of the route, and a very physical receiver. What did you like about Aiden Williams this weekend?
I like the fact that it was the same old Aiden Williams. I know you got a text from what it was a Power 5 assistant coach. Hey, what's the deal with Aiden Williams? And I wanted to grab your phone and be like, what do you mean? What's the deal? This guy's always done this. Aiden Williams. I go back to Florida's Friday Night Lights camp last June. He went 4.5 on the hand time. All right, so that's a good time. I know it's not laser verified, but he was an alpha that night. He was an alpha at the Under Armour All-America camp in Atlanta a few months ago. You liked him at that New Orleans tournament. I just think he's kind of in a weird part of the country, Mississippi. It's an overlooked region, but this guy can play, and he's someone that I think has been in and out of the top 247 like 5 times. It's like he's kind of like a fringe player that goes between the minor league team and the major league team. And I think we just need to sign him to a one-way contract. None of these more two-way contracts. Get him in the top 247. He can play, and I think it's going to be an SEC battle for him. I was just talking with him off the record. He said he's going to take his official visits during the season. I know Ole Miss really, really wants him and Lane Kiffin in that offense, but LSU's in there. I think Georgia's kicking the tires, but he's a stock-up guy for me, and I wish he still had the red hair because he used to have red hair, and that was kind of his trademark. But he told me he's all business now, so no more red hair for Mr. Aiden Williams.
He's going to fall into somebody's lap, and somebody's going to be very fortunate. You know, like you're talking about that text. I got the text, like, what's the deal? I'm like, dude, you better get on it, right? I mean, this guy's stock is going through the roof right now, and he's going to continue to move up the board as we see more of him. But, Drew, a couple other guys down in the state of Florida. We're going to start with one of our favorite guys and one of the most talked about guys on our show, Lucas Simmons, top 24/7 offensive lineman, the Florida State commitment, the international prospect. We're going to talk about another international prospect here in a second. But we kind of thought, okay, what is Lucas Simmons going to look like against elite competition? We got to see that this weekend. What were your impressions? Were you excited? Were you disappointed? Or was it more of what you thought it would be?
Oh, I'm going to kick this one right back to you because I'll admit I did not watch any of those live the reps from the one-on-ones live. I was watching the 7-on-7 and the one-on-ones, but I think I ran over to you and I said, hey, how did he do? Because I was concerned that he might struggle. But by all accounts, it sounds like Lucas held his own, correct?
Yeah, I thought he did a good job. When you look at Lucas Simmons, it's so much of the athletic foundation that we like. An international player has not been playing organized football for a long time in the States. His dad played football at Oklahoma, but, you know, I think athletically he's there, right? It's all about the feet, and from the feet up, we like so much of what Lucas Simmons is. He has a long frame at 6'6" plus and about 315 pounds. He's beautiful. He's exactly what you want. I think for him, it's all technical, much like we talked about PJ Adibaware. It's very similar to Lucas Simmons in terms of where he needs to develop. That's going to be at the point of attack. So I think once he gets to Tallahassee, has the opportunity to work with offensive line coach and offensive coordinator Alex Atkins. Alex Atkins, by the way, who's part of the Preps to Pros coaching staff that we're still putting together. He's going to be a guy that I think is going to be more of a slow burn at the next level, but I would not be surprised if he's one of the premier offensive linemen in the country 3 to 4 years from now, once that light bulb comes on for Lucas Simmons. But Drew, I want to get to another guy, and I hope I'm pronunciating this right. Olas Okay, here's our guy from Connecticut, originally from Finland. He was out there this weekend at the Future 50 in Bradenton, Florida. There was a lot of kind of, I don't want to say speculation, but talk whether or not could he be and could he hold up at the next level as a left or a right tackle. I think after seeing him this week, that kind of cleared some things up. But his recruitment is starting to kick up a little bit. But Drew, tell me what you thought about him. Like I said, I know you didn't get to see kind of the offense and defensive linemen go at it, but some of your impressions of Olas Cooper.
Well, first exposure to him, and you're right, his recruitment is heating up. He is going to make a decision. I believe it's on Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern time. Miami in there, Alabama getting some juice as of late. Keep an eye on the Crimson Tide there. You know, I think people overreact to some of these one-on-ones. I mean, Olas is not a kid that's been doing one-on-ones his whole life. He grew up in Finland playing hockey, with guys that are on the Florida Panthers. I mean, that's what he did. He's still trying to figure it all out. I mean, that's a difficult setting for an offensive lineman trying to, block some of these freaks that we saw out there. But, I think he's probably more of an interior lineman. That was my take. He's athletic. And that's what you want to see. So I'm a fan of him. I'm not panicking. I don't think he's a guy that needs to sink in the rankings or anything like that. And I think, that's why these schools want him. That's why Miami wants him. That's why Alabama wants him. But he was impressive. What did you think, Cooper?
Yeah, he's moved up for us, and I was having this conversation with Gabby Uridia there, who covers Miami's site, and listen, I think watching him kind of go through the individual period, you liked him a lot, the way that he moved. I think technically you knew that he was going to be a little bit behind there, and I think he was. DeSean Womack was a guy that kind of feasted off of him in the one-on-one drill, but I think you're right. You got to take a step back from 30,000 feet and say, okay, this is a guy that we're going to try at the right tackle position. We'll see how he acclimates, but if he doesn't acclimate there, it's a very natural progression inside. You kick him inside the guard, and I think you put him in a phone booth, and I think that plays more to his strengths. I think he's strong, powerful at the point of his attack, and I think he kind of leans on his frame right now. That's more where he is. He is a raw player, a lot like Lucas Simmons, and with these international players, I think a lot of time, a lot of resources, and a lot of coaching is to be expected when you go out and get guys like Lucas Simmons or Olas Cooper. So we'll see where he goes, but certainly high on him. He moved up in the most recent rankings of the Top 247, so we'll see about that. But Drew, we are almost done with our first episode of Preps to Pros, and it's been a good one. So much going on today. But Drew, some of your final thoughts, I guess, before we leave today.
I can go in any direction here, right? That's the goal of this.
All you, baby.
Okay, let's talk about Ohio State's offensive class that got another weapon on Sunday. Jelani Thurman, who was at the Future 50, the tight end out of Georgia. This guy, his mother played in the WNBA. His dad was at Georgia and went to the NFL. He's joining a Ohio State recruiting class that already includes three of the nation's top wide receivers: Noah Rogers, Carnell Tate, and Brandon Inniss. On top of that, they got Bryson Rogers, who would probably be wide receiver one for like 60 other schools in the country. So I just think Ryan Day, what they're assembling on that side of the ball offensively is awesome. Jelani Thurman, one of my favorite tight end prospects in the class. Another guy that's always shined when I see him. He's got a huge catch radius. And I don't know why I brought up this player comparison to you and some of the other guys over the weekend. I think there's some Mike Gesicki in his game in terms of him being able to go up and get a ball. He's a little bit bigger than Gesicki, but Gesicki was a multi-sport athlete just like Jelani Thurman. And I didn't even know this until I looked it up recently. Jelani Thurman, he has a Stetson basketball offer, so he's just a really good athlete. But, man, what Ohio State is doing, what quarterback would not want to play with those receivers and tight ends with Jelani Thurman now joining that group?
Ohio State, man, we kind of take them for granted, the job that they do. Ryan Day, Jelani Thurman, Ty Lockwood, another guy, tight end out of the state of Tennessee. Certainly a lot to like there. I got a two-part kind of final thoughts here. One is more football and the other one isn't. So, Drew, we're going to talk a little bit about Justice Haynes. And the reason I bring this up, our good friend Josh Pate got to talking about it a little bit last night, how about maybe Kirby Smart is not recruiting at the level that we thought he would be recruiting at, coming off a national championship, their first one since the 1980s. But listen, if I'm a Georgia fan, I'm not concerned at all. Justice Haynes is a fantastic player out of the state of Georgia from Buford High School. Him going to Alabama, it just happens. Look, you are in an arms race now. This is the way it's going to go. Alabama, Georgia, back and forth. Kirby Smart, Nick Saban. Listen, the trio of linebackers coming in for Kirby Smart, and I know that's a defensive side of the ball here, but you talk about C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, and Troy Bowles. Those are three of the top four linebackers in the top 24/7, and all three guys that we are gung-ho about here at Preps to Pros. We love those guys. They might not give up a point with those guys coming through. So a lot to be excited about there. And then on a personal note, Drew, I got to get down to South Florida this weekend, and guess where we hit? The Wawa. I got exposed to the Wawa. Drew's like, you ever been to a Wawa? Never been to a Wawa. We go. Crazy scene. A lot going on there. And I'm like, hey, man, Florida, what a crazy place. We almost get in a couple Uber ride accidents, and I'm like, hey, what a world, man. Florida man, my guy, Andrew Ivins down there representing well as always. But guys, if you're looking for Preps to Pros, episode 2 now coming on Wednesday, 2 p.m. Central Time will be me and Andrew Ivins. This will be us now going forward Monday and Wednesday, and so much happening right now at 247 Sports. Make sure you like and subscribe, not only our page, but the 247 Sports YouTube page as well. And The Block with Colin Kennedy, Brockermeyer, Reed, all those guys are doing a fantastic job. And our director of recruiting as well, Steve Wilfong, he's on it on the Wilfong Whip Around. So Recruiting News Central right here at 247 Sports. You don't need to go anywhere else. So for Cooper Petagna, Andrew Ivins, and the Invisible Man they call Jesse Myers, we appreciate you guys joining us, and we will see you on Wednesday.
Are we good?